Okay, so welcome to my talk. Kill useEffect. We need to kill useEffect because useEffect is kind of hard to use. And I'm not the only one thinking that. Even the React team thinks that. In fact, it's looking at ways where we can get rid of those useEffect for future versions of React. Will we be able to completely eradicate it? Probably not. It's going to be staying around. I mean, we need to be backwards compatible forever and ever. So it will stay with us. We won't get completely rid of it. But we're going to have a great time. We're going to have a great time trying to get, as minimal use as we can. And just use it where it is supposed to be used. And use alternatives when it makes sense. So you may be wondering, what is useEffect for? So a few people here are new to React. Who here has done React for less than a year? Raise your hand. See, we have a few people. They're starting out using React. It's been out for more than 10 years, and that's okay. I'm happy to tell you guys that if you don't learn, useEffect, that's okay. You'll survive because the next version that's coming up will be less reliant on it. So that's a good thing. So what is the useEffect? Well, first of all, we need to know about the React model. If you remember, the React model means that we're going to have props and state that are going to run a renderer and output something on the web or on React Native. But the thing is, we have this kind of UI is a function of state and props. One of the tenets of that way of thinking is that all of those rendering functions must be pure. What is a pure function? A pure function is a function that will only take inputs and release outputs and change nothing else in the program. It will not affect any global, any outside state, any outside library. It will not affect anything. Now, the pure functions are going to be like a double function, where you just take a function and it just adds up, 2 times the number passed, or something like that. I mean, if you have a numerical function, like add, subtract, or so on, these functions are pure because you just take input and release output, and they change nothing else about the state. Now, the real world has state. The real world is going to have outside systems, external libraries. The real world is not pure. So we have here the problem. React wants rendering to be pure, but browsers have lots of ugly stuff out there. So to manage these two worlds, we need a workaround. And effects are the workaround. How do effects work? Well, they're going to say that if you need to affect the outside of your rendering, do it in this special function called the effect. And this will run after the rendering. Simple as that. Oh yeah, great. Someone wants to move my mouse once in a while? Okay, let's go to the next slide. Why? Oh, there we go. Oh, that's me. I'll have to, okay. So this is just to tell, oh, this is way too small. We need the right size. Okay, so I've been programming for a while, so if you're wondering what I do, just read this very quickly. Now you're done. Okay, and yeah, I've been doing this for way too long. And now I've got a company called React Academy Live, and I do training, mostly private training in companies. So if you ever need, you're saying, hey, we've got a team of people that need to be onboarded to React. If that happens. Those people that have less than a year of experience, they're going to like my course. And if you've got more than a year of experience, well, you're going to like me, but probably not my course. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So useEffect. So useEffect is a React hook that lets you synchronize a component with an external system. whatever that may be. Examples of external system. Other libraries like jQuery, Angular, GraphJS, anything that's an external library. Tree.js that we've talked about in the previous presentation is an example of that. Data fetching, if it talks to some network library, it is external to React. It's impure. And then any browser API you have, the history API, the navigation API, the location API, and so on. All of these are external systems. So that's a lot. So effects, when you use a useEffect, they're going to run after a render. Using useEffect will create an effect, and so effects are going to be run right after the render. And if there's a cleanup function, it's going also to run after the cleanup function. But I won't go into these details right now. Now, this careful thing is important. If an effect changes a state, this will create a re-render, which will create another effect, and so on. And it might cause an infinite loop. So now when we use a useEffect, we need to be aware. How will I avoid that infinite loop? Then there's something called the dependency array. And that dependency array will avoid the problem. The way it works. So this is the usage, useEffect. You use a setup function, you use dependencies. This is optional, hence the question mark. And so so you use a setup function to set up and connect to the outside system. You return an arrow function to disconnect. That's going to be what we call the cleanup effect. Dependencies is an array that decides if we need to run the effect again. If there's no changes, we don't run the effect. If there's one, there's an E missing here. I'll have to correct that. One or multiple changes, then run the effect. If we don't have a dependency array, then the effect runs after each render. If we have an empty dependency array, then the effect runs once. Once you know those rules, easy peasy. Now, how many of you have made an error with one of those rules? Yeah, thank you. A few of you haven't raised your hand. I'd love to be with you guys.
I'm probably wrong.
That's okay. We love you. You're going to help us. Also, useEffects are hard because there are lots of rules, like renders and useEffect are run twice while in dev. There's something called the strict mode. And they run twice because they want to allow us to detect if there's an unexpected side effect. If I see a total that's wrong, this should be 1, but it's 2. Well, probably the problem that I have is that, I have a side effect. So running it twice means it's good because I can detect the side effect, but it's bad because sometimes, I need to now deal with that bug. Also useEffect and create unwanted re-renders if we're not careful. We don't use the dependency array correctly. useEffect should only affect one thing only, so it's harder to manage when multiple things are affected. And sometimes we're going to get into what we call the cascade of useEffect. There's a useEffect here, and the effect in there is going to change a state of another component. And now this component will re-render, which is going to also have a useEffect, which is going to modify state of another component. And then we have this merry-go-round. And when this merry-go-round is circular, what happens? Infinite loop. Not fun at all. Okay. So this is the goal of the React team from their website. It says, with time, the React team's goal is to reduce the number of the effects in your app to the minimum by providing more specific solutions to more specific problems. So they're going to add in the future new hooks. We're going to have more hooks in our toolbox. And now we can play with those hooks and remove those useEffects. And let me tell you, will I avoid a lot of lines of code? No, it's not as if my code will now be, twice as small or twice as fast. No. It's just going to feel cleaner, and it's mostly going to be the fact that I don't have to manage dependencies. I don't have to manage what happens if I get into that cascade thing. I don't have to think about that anymore. And that, for me, is the good part. It's about productivity and knowing our program is without error. Now, will it make the code smaller? Perhaps a few lines, and that's a good thing. So here's an example. So let me, so let me tell you about this app. So this is live, by the way. This is kind of cool. I can move from one file to the next, and I can, do a change here live, and yay, it works. I can modify stuff live. Programming in front of people. How fun. Okay, so what is this thing? This is just going to show how routing works. So this isn't anything wonderful. I did a routing talk about a year ago. It was widely successful. I loved it. And I needed a reason to say, hey, I'm going to improve my bad code from last year. I didn't know that I had bad code, but now I know. So what's the code about? What's the error about? Well, there's no error. The code works well. It's just using a useEffect. So if I go over here to app.js, this is where the magic is going to happen. So as you can see, when I move from one page to the next, the current page changes. So the way this works is that we're going to have a state about the current page. And that state will change when we move from one menu to the next. We're going to essentially look at an event about hash change. This event is going to look at this thing up here. So when I move to news or to contact, when this changes, this hash change event will run, and it will run this delegate, or I should say, this arrow function, change page, which is just over here. And you can see this here is just one line. It's just calling a set state. It's just modifying the state, creating a re-render. Okay. Now this, I wouldn't say it's brittle, but it's filled with traps if you're not careful. So I'll show you one of the traps, that I had once, and was kind of like, okay, this was a hard bug to fix. But once you know, it's not so bad. So as you can see here, it doesn't seem so bad. Let's look at the useEffect, because this code is not very long. As you can see, we've got a few imports at the top. We have our function app, and then we've got this thing here. This is our event handler. We've got the useEffect, I'll come back to that. And then we've got the return, which is, the render. You can see the render is just going to render the menu and the route with the current page. So it's going to, essentially just display the right page. Okay, so now we have that. So let's look at the useEffect, because this is where we're going to have the magic. Okay, let's look at this carefully. This useEffect here is going to have an arrow function, because we don't need to run this right now. The way this works is that we're going to handle the hash change event. So each time our hash code up there in the browser changes, we get a notification, and we can run some code that's going to change the state and then create another re-render. So the way we do that is with window.addEventListener. Now there are other ways to manage events in React if you're using what we call synthetic events. In this case, for this particular event, since it's a browser event, I cannot use a synthetic events. Synthetic events can only be used with components that are managed by React. And since the browser is not managed by React, well, yeah, I cannot use a synthetic event. I need to use good old Windows.EventListener. Hash change page, okay. And we can see the return as another arrow function, which is going to do the opposite effect. It's going to remove the event listener. Now this is important, because remember, when I'm in dev mode, this is going to run twice. And it's going to register twice. Now, the biggest problem that I had with this once in a while was that it slowed down when, once upon a time I had this. No dependency array, which means that each time I'm going to navigate, it's going to register. So as we go on, pages are going to essentially call my set state more than once. And to prove that, I'm going to prove it to you by console.log. Console.log, and I'm going to say I was called. There we go. So just to see if this worked, I was going to hit save, but there's no save here. So this is live. So let's see what happens here in my console here. Console was cleared. I go over here. I was called once. And then I was called once again. It seems that the bug that I was thinking about is not there anymore. Why is that?
Because there's no changes of state after that.
There's no change of state, but there is a change of state. News,
you
contact.
change the state once, and then that's it. It runs it.
Yeah, but then it should run the useEffect again and add another event listener. And the second event listener is going to register again. So usually...
Because you remove it?
Yeah, you
have it returned.
Oh, I remove it. Oh, that's why.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I had the bug, I didn't remove it. So now I avoided the bug because I removed it. So there you go. You're so right. Thank you for that. Well, yeah, once upon a while I had a problem, but yeah, because of this return, I'm removing it. Everything is equal, so yeah, it's not being called more than once. Now, if I were to comment this line, now I would get into trouble. Now I would get into trouble, and I'm going to prove it by just refreshing this page. There we go. The console was cleared. I do contact. I was called once. I was called, you see? Now it's 3 times. I go to contact, and it becomes more and more. I've got 7 messages. And now we've got 11 messages. And now we've got 16 messages. And you can see it increases way too quickly.
What happens if you put the empty array back, but you don't remove the comment?
Yeah, so that, and I refresh the page, yeah, I'll be okay. So if I do that, so I bring you...
No, you leave the comment on, but you put the dependency array, the empty dependency
Yeah, exactly.
array back.
So in this case, this will work correctly. So in this case, this is what I was doing a while ago when I was giving courses 2 or 3 years ago, before we had those other things. So this is the way it works. So if I go to news, I go to contact, I go to news, I go to contact, it increases once each time I click. Exactly the way we want to. So we avoid the bug also this way. Very good.
But
Good. Yeah, but.
then what, did you have both?
Well, I had both, mostly because it's a good practice. They've updated the documentation recently, the React folks, and their documentation is saying, yeah, before we said if you don't need it, don't put it. But now we're saying, no, put it. And we're putting it always. Why? Because of that nasty dev mode. The dev mode that puts it twice. Now I'm not in dev mode, but if I was in dev mode, yeah, this would essentially be, I would have 2 event listeners being listened to instead of 1. Yes,
also,
Nick.
if you eliminate if you close that component or get rid of the component, your listener would stay in the DOM, and you would accumulate listeners progressively, essentially having
Yes.
generated.
So if a component is unmounted, that cleanup function gets called. So yeah, it's a good thing if we need to get rid of something so that when we come back to it, it doesn't get re-registered a second time or a third time. So that's what Nick was saying without the mic. So I'm just saying this for the mic. Yeah. Is that okay, Nick?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other person that has a raised hand? No? Good. Going to move on. How am I doing for the time? Okay, good. Okay, let's go with the useSyncExternalStore. This is the new way of doing things. it doesn't change a lot. I have to tell you, it barely changes. But then again, I don't have that pesky little dependency array. I don't have to, worry too much. So we're going to have a subscribe hash change function here. That's going to do my window add event listener and my window remove event listener. So this has been isolated. Why? This has been isolated so I can call it from this use. Oh, this is way too. Let me move this around. There we go. That's a little bit better. Okay. Perhaps I should decrease. Well, that's not so bad. I'm just going to do this. And anything else I need to do? No. As you can see, very simple code. We've got at the bottom my return, the same return we had before. We have our, instead of the useEffect, we have the useSyncExternalStore. And we've got up here my subscribe hash change. So the way it works, when I use a useSyncExternalStore, I just subscribe to the changes with my 2 lines. Window add event listener or window remove event listener. And now you can imagine it can be anything that connects or disconnects to something. You need to connect to a chat or disconnect to a chat. Or you need to, I was going to say fetch that I wouldn't. I need to connect to a
Stream.
what?
A stream.
A stream. Yeah, a stream. Yeah, good. That would be a good thing. Anything else we can see we can connect to or subscribe to?
A timer.
A timer. Yeah, that could be. Yeah, a timer could work. Yeah, can see that. Very good. Nice. Okay. So these are things we can subscribe to and unsubscribe to with the return. And now we can see we have our subscribe hash change. And here we've got 2 things. How we're going to read the value and read the value on the server and the client. And we have another error here. But hey, I can correct live. There we go. Read the value, server. Okay, good. So this is read the value on the server when we have server-side React. Now this React here doesn't use server-side. So this is just for show. This is not working at all. But hey, I could do it. If I had a different way of reading this value on the server, I could write some code for that.
But doesn't your window question mark, since you're on the server, you will never have a window, so
Yeah, exactly. This will always fail. I would have to write something properly to read the URL that comes from, I guess, something like the express route. I wouldn't say, it all depends on what I'm using. If I'm using Vercel Next has a property about, what is the current URL and so on.
in Remix you use the loader, in the loader function you can get the parameters.
Exactly, and the loader function in Remix can provide you that same information. Very good. We have a Remix person here. Thank you for that, Nick. Okay, anything else? No. Okay, so that's it. These are the changes. 3 lines. Now, one thing that I can do to improve this is to say, hey, let's improve this by isolating this code in my own custom hook. So we're just going to take these lines of code and these lines of code, and we're going to essentially, whoop, too far. We're going to essentially, hey, just 1 line. Now we just moved the code around. Use hash change is going to do the magic that we had previously, and there's my code. With the subscribe hash change is still there, and over here we have our useSyncExternalStore with the few things here. Good. Okay, one last thing that I need to tell you about, and I say one last thing, but it's a big thing. It's like one last thing from one of those Apple demos. It's a big thing. In the near future, there's going to be a new hook called use. It's a special hook. Now, this hook can be used with any promise to fetch data or whatever. As long as it's a promise and it returns some kind of data, that's going to be okay. It does not need to be top level like other hooks. It can be used in loops, conditional, and inner functions, which breaks kind of the rules of hooks that we're used to. But it makes sense because it doesn't have any kind of array state that we have like with the other ones. It's available in React 19, so that means I can use it now by using the beta version of React 19. If you're not using the beta version of React 19, wait a few weeks, there's a conference called the React Conference, I think in May, which means that if I was planning to release React 19, I would do it on that morning. So my guess, in May, do you know the date?
I don't know by heart.
You don't know by heart the date.
I know it's in May though. 'cause
He knows it's May. So there we go. Okay. If only we had a device to know the date. If only.
May 15.
Oh, May 15. Oh, wow. 16? Okay.
I checked.
You checked. Thank you for that. You've got a magical device. Okay. So this is not what I want. This is what I want. Fetching with effect. So we've got here a page with data that comes from a list of the MCU movies. It's one of those nice URLs where you can get the movies, and I can even refresh the movies. So this is the old way of doing things. You know, when I was giving courses up until today, this is what I would show. I would tell them, yeah, you get the movies by doing a fetch inside of a function that's called by a useEffect. So the useEffect is a little below. Here we go. useEffect, get movies. And you can imagine, get movies is going to essentially here, you know, get the data and also manage something about the set loading, because I want, when I click on refresh movies, have the internet here is too fast. If the internet here wasn't so fast, you would see a loading screen. Now I can slow down the internet using the, yeah, but I don't have the time. You trust me, trust me, trust me. Okay, so that's what it is. Anything else I need to say here about this thing? Yeah, so that's the magic here. There's an await fetch where we get the data, and that's where the magic happens. And you know, when we get the data, what are we going to do? We're going to essentially modify the state so that we can re-render. That's the last part of this getMovie function. Okay. So now let's write the same thing using the future version of React. Now the code is easier. I mean, we have less lines of code. Now I have to tell you, this is what we call vernacular React. If you're not using anything else. I mean, in real world, what would you be using? You would be using Next, and Next has its own way of fetching data. Or you would be using Remix, and Remix has React Router, and React Router has a way of loading data too. Or you would be using something like, what's the one with the Tanstack?
useQuery.
useQuery, yeah, Tanstack useQuery. So these are libraries that will help you get data. So I want to tell you, if you're using this, you're already in the future. You don't need React 19 yet. But for the other people, those that are not using those libraries, those that are using vernacular React, the natural React that is not augmented by a framework. Yeah.
Vanilla.
Oh yeah, vanilla React. I like that. Yeah, my React is vanilla. Has no flavor. Okay, so here we have our function app, blah, 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 blah. So here, two things are nice. So first of all, I'm using suspense, which I could not use before. Now, suspense will allow me to have a loading screen. Now, this says loading, but it could be a spinner, by the way. I could use something else than a div loading. So when I click on refresh movies, it's going to say loading, as you can see. Good. What else do I have to tell you about this? Yeah, I'm just going to move the code around so you can see a little bit better. So you can see here, my code is way smaller than it was. You can see here that I'm going to be using at the bottom in this function called movies, the use getMovies. And so this is going to get a promise of getMovies, and then once I have the data, I'm going to, if you can see this, display the movies. So I don't need to manage stuff like I had before. In fact, you're going to say, I don't even see a state. I don't see a use state. And you're right, there's no use state here. In fact, I'm just using use getMovies. Now, let's face it, I have to use probably a cache of some sort if I want to avoid reloading this thing each time it refreshes. But you get the idea. The idea is that now a lot of things that were hard to do before are not hard anymore. That means also that we're going to have two ways of writing things, because we're not going to remove useEffect. useEffect is still going to be there tomorrow. All that old code that you wrote 5 years ago is still going to work. I mean, we've been using hooks for what, 5 years now? So yeah, that old code from 5 years ago is still running. It can still run. It will still run in 5 years. So that means that now, when you're a beginner, you'll have to remember, you have the new way that everyone loves, and we have the old way. But the old way is like shameful, so we should avoid it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Nick.
Your get movies function versus the version before, you're now returning a promise, whereas in the previous version you returned an object specifically. And
Exactly.
I'm assuming that is necessary because use requires a promise to function.
Exactly. Use has to have a promise there. And in fact, if you have something that's not a promise, like raw data, you'll have to promisify it. You'll have to wrap it in a promise. Question.
What does it hide though? What's use hide? Because like I feel like it's hiding something. Right?
Yes, it's hiding something.
Is it like a use effect?
I'm happy that I'm not in a React team because they have to manage it. So this is what we call the joy of open source. You can go on the open source website of React and look at exactly how this has been built. I don't know all the innards. I know it's still being worked on, so there's probably a few changes still coming, but it's mostly done because React 19 is going to be released on May 15th. There we go. Thank you, Agadi. There's also a question by Jose.
If you put the definition of get movies inside the function movies, it will turn into a infinite loop?
Very good question. Can I get into an infinite loop with this thing? I haven't tried this. So your question is, let's try it. Let's try to break things. What should I be doing, Jose? How should I break this? Please tell me.
Yes, it's got.
So here in get movies, instead of returning response.json, I return get movies. Is that it?
No, just like define get movies inside the movies function.
Oh, inside the movies function. Yes.
Oh no, just put into the app. It will be fine.
Yeah, you're right. So if I do this, each time it's going to, you're right, each time it's going to refresh, it's going to create a new function, because think about it, inner functions are going to be recreated each time you render. Unless you're using something like use callback. I don't want to get into use callback. Everyone hates that. So I will just avoid the problem for you guys. So yeah, we could break it that way, I think. And that's for, just fun's sake. Try to break it. I'm just wondering, how would that break? I hit Control X, so it's been removed. And now let's add it back inside of app. There we go. Something went wrong.
Can't be accessed because...
Can be accessed from here because it's being called from outside, from movies. Yeah, so because it's being called from outside, it's hard for me to have the error. Now I could bring all of this inside, the movies and the other one, but there, you can see we have a sort of protection here because we're not creating function inside of functions. And I think that's a nice thing. I think that makes it a little bit more solid. I mean, usually we have to do that because we're going to be using something called, what's it called when we can call something from the inner function, something from the outer function? Closure, exactly. We're using closure usually. Now in this case, we don't need the closure anymore. So that's, getting rid of closure is a good thing because then code is easier to wrap your head around. Then you don't need to use that use callback we were talking about. So let's try to break it. I'm going to cut this over here and put it also inside. Can we break it? It's not broken. Oh, wow. Refresh movie. Oh, it seems to be working. Or at least, it seems like it. So I guess it works. It's not broken. Wow, I'm amazed. Technology. Hey, what time is it? Is it time to wrap up? Hey, it's time to wrap up. You've been a wonderful crowd. Incredible. So I hope to see you in a future conference or in one of my courses, because, you know, we all love having fun. And, you know, I could think of another way of spending 2 days with me. I can think of other things that are worse. So there you go. So thank you. Do we have questions, or are we going right into the game? We have the bubble question.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass it to you.
He's going to pass it. Oh, there we go.
I just have one question for the suspense. How does it know which function it has to wait, or how is it related? Because you don't give any parameters or any props.
So you're right. How does it know? Well, the suspense doesn't really care. As long as there's something that's not ready, it's going to show that alternate screen. That is, yeah, it's waiting for anything that's not resolved with this loading screen. So, you know, you could have 3 U's, 5 U's, 10 U's. This suspense will catch them all. Now, you can have multiple layers of suspense. You can have, you know, a suspense inside of another component that has a suspense, and you can, you know,
Nest them.
wrap them?
Nest them.
Nest them, thank you, nest them. And if you're nesting them, in that case, you can control more the output that's being outputted by your suspense. So if you needed to say, when this thing is not ready, I want this kind of suspense, and when this thing is not ready, I want this other kind of suspense, I would nest them into different suspense. There you go.
Thank you. I have a question about the useExternalStore that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
useEffects. You mentioned that you could use that potentially on a server using Remix or Next or similar frameworks. So do you mean that it's an API that's also compatible with React server components?
This is more going to be, yeah, it will be compatible with React server components. React server components is a lot of things. So let me rephrase that. It's going to be compatible with React server-side rendering.
Okay.
And I want to make emphasis on that, because React server-side component is kind of a different beast. And you know what? There's going to be other talks about that very soon. So I feel that. I really feel that. So perhaps I'll do one of those talks in the future, explaining the details and differences. But in this particular case, think more about
like the page router with Next or
yeah,
something similar. Okay.
React server-side rendering. If there's a React server-side rendering, it's going to be handled correctly.
Thank you.
Hey, we have no other questions. I feel this is the... Do we have a game tonight, like a question game? No question. You guys have no exam, no question, no game. That is so unfair. But you can stay around, talk to each other, talk to me, talk to Jose. I have a question for Jose later on, so you know, you may want to listen. And there we go. Anything else we need to...
Yeah, just a few wrapping words.
Yes, he has a few wrapping words.
Thank you, by the way.